Our next presentation is going to come from the founder of OpenLeaks. And his presentation is about the digital revolution, how it's changing everything, and how that can be a good thing. So please help me welcome Mr. Daniel Domscheit-Berg.
CeBIT Global Conferences.
Have you got space here?
Hi.
Have you got space for everything?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Perfectly fine. Yeah, so hi everybody. As I've been introduced, I'm going to speak a little bit about, let's say, the bigger picture of a digital revolution. There have been a couple of talks that are related to this already. So just so I get an idea, has any one of you attended the talk that Jeremy Rifkin has given on this stage a few days ago? Okay, so and have any of you attended the speech by Ed Snowden yesterday? Okay, so so maybe I need to go a little into at least some basics there. So what I'd like to speak about is basically I'd like to bring these two topics together, where what Jeremy Rifkin spoke about and this whole field of a digital revolution is about the tremendous potential that we have in order to restructure society, to come up with technological solutions for problems we have in this world, and for actually building a world that is more inclusive than the world we see today. And on the other hand of that, or the other end of that spectrum, we have problems with mass surveillance, the NSA scandal, and other scandals involving the whole problemacy around data collection and the invasion of people's privacy. So I think it's not a coincidence that we see these two effects at about the same time. And my idea for today would be to try and zoom out a little bit so I can give you an idea of how these things fit together and what we might have to pay attention to in the future. So I don't know, I haven't been at CeBIT for a few years. It's been a while, and I've been wandering around these great halls yesterday and today, and things have changed quite a bit. So it feels to me, at least, like the seriousness of the digital revolution has arrived here. The last time I was here, I didn't really want to come back because it felt too much focused on consumers, on fancy gadgets that are happening. And when I wandered around here today and yesterday, I got the feeling that it's all more about business these days, about the industry, about all these big things, big data, the cloud, and all of that, which is, I don't know, revolutionizing the world and changing everything that we thought for granted. So on one hand, I think this is a really good thing because it's something we need to address, we need to focus on and speak about, because it in fact is revolutionizing the world. This whole digital revolution, the tools we are creating today, all the kinds of technologies that we can use today and tomorrow can have a tremendous benefit for solving the world's problems. We can come up with new technologies that can be created in a decentralized way so that people all over the world can profit from these technologies and can use those technologies in order to enhance their life, in order to get better access to knowledge, to perspectives, and all kinds of other things. So what we see here at CeBIT, I think this year is kind of the manifestation of this potential that we can see, of a world in which we can use technology in the future in order to create benefits for humanity and not just for the sake of technology itself. And this is actually something I'm missing, on the other hand, as well a little bit, because whatever we do here and whatever all of you are interested in because you're interested in technology is always and will always be even more in the future a highly political topic. Whatever you do with technology these days will have an impact and an influence on the world of tomorrow, on all kinds of areas of daily lives of people, of how power in the world will be distributed, of who gets access to what kinds of technology. And there will be lots of really, really big questions that are coming up with this kind of digital revolution. So for me personally, the whole area right round about 3D printing, for example, is one really good example of that. So some of you might think this is an old shoe or so, and it's already been around for a few years, and it's nothing new. But if you look at what's happening in this field in the last few years, or in the last few months, actually, you can see that there's some fundamental changes going on with this kind of technology. There's been a forecast now that the first working heart that can be transplanted is within 10 years of research from today on. So within the next 10 years or so, we can hopefully see the first kind of active organs that can be printed from organic matter and that can be transplanted into people that require a transplant. This is, I think, a good example of why the whole debate around copyright and about licenses, about patents and all this kind of stuff is not about music or movies that are people pirating. But when we're surpassing this early stage of the digital revolution that we're in today, this is going to affect all kinds of really serious topics. It's going to affect the question of who will actually have the opportunity to get a transplant. And we're developing into a world, and Jeremy Rifkin has just recently published a really interesting book about this, which is going to be some kind of zero marginal cost society. There will not be the question on if I get the transplant or any of you will get it, but we can all have one because we can just create it. There's no natural scarcity for these types of things anymore. In the same kind of way that there's not going to be natural scarcity for knowledge, for the availability of books that people can read in order to understand the world and gain a perspective. And there's not going to be scarcity in all kinds of other areas anymore because we are developing tools already today, and we will be doing even more tomorrow, that will rid the world of this kind of scarcity. And this is opening up a lot of dynamics in our society that will challenge the whole way we see the world, the whole way we have structured society around technology, the way we solve problems in this world, and the kinds of rules we have come up with for businesses, for the way we deal with ethics in this world, all these types of things. So we're heading into a world of really, really big questions, I think. And I'm not entirely sure if this is something that we're so much aware of, or if this is not something that, because we're all so stuck in the daily doings of our businesses, in promoting the technologies around here and looking what we can use for our companies or at home or wherever, if we're kind of missing this big picture and the implications that this big picture will have. Now, another angle of this whole big picture, I think, is the question of what the internet actually represents. So my professional background is I'm kind of a network security expert. I had an early start on with technology. When I was a kid, I was quite early introduced into technology by my parents and grandparents. And I was very lucky to be, in the mid-'80s, one of the first people in my school who got access to a Commodore C64. And I had this Commodore C64, and I was also interested in tools or toys called Fischertechnik. I've seen a few models standing around here at some of the booths. I didn't know it even existed anymore. I think it was all Lego these days. But at some day, so I was working or building all kinds of conveyor belt systems when I was a kid with Fischertechnik, very complex systems all around my child room that I was playing in. And at some stage, I got introduced to this Fischertechnik computing set, which provided for a training robot that I could suddenly connect to my Commodore C64. And then I could program the Commodore in a way that it could interact with the real world, and it could suddenly rid myself out of this whole conveyor belt system. So when I was 10 years old, basically, I found out that I could rid the world of my own job and become jobless. I could make myself superfluous. And I think this is just a really very simple example maybe, but it is another example of one of those potentials today. A lot of the technologies we are seeing and we are creating is actually ridding people of jobs. And I think this is a big chance that we have, but we're kind of missing this big picture. We're kind of missing out on this opportunity because we're not asking how we need to structure society around this type of a disruptive change so that all these people that got freed of very simple labor or or labor that can be machinized somehow, how we structure the world or society in a way that these people will still have a perspective. You cannot tell 50-year-old taxi drivers that in 10 years' time maybe will be without work because we have autonomous vehicles, that they should start becoming programmers or something like this. This is not the way this is going to work. It will require us to rethink society and come up with different kinds of solutions, with a different kind of society all around that. Now, I got introduced to, or I got interested in networks. This is the point I was actually trying to make. I got interested in networks because of the mere fact that in a neutral network, in a neutral internet, and this is what I think the whole topic around net neutrality is about. In a neutral network, there's no differentiator, there's no one discriminating between me and you, and between me or us and everybody else in the world. In a net neutral network, everybody is on eye level with everybody else. And this is in a world where we can have decentralized kind of production, where we can have access to knowledge and wisdom, where we can build a universal library and these types of things. This is the fundamental technology underlying this kind of potential in the world. So I think it is also important for us to understand that topics around network neutrality, around protecting the internet from interference, from let's say, harsh commercial interests, in fostering the build-out of real broadband for everybody, in a sense of symmetric broadband that doesn't differentiate between me sending and being able to receive, for example, that we don't lose these types of topics out of sight, because they all fit together into this picture that I'm trying to paint of a society in which we can use all this technology, not just because we can make business with it, but because we can solve problems and because we can empower all the people around the globe, no matter where they are, no matter what color they have, no matter what sex they have, no matter what their social status is or what their background in what other fashion is. We can empower the people with this. And this empowerment, right along with how digital or communication revolutions work, with how industrial revolutions work, is very disruptive, because it is shifting powers in a society. It is reshaping the way that power is distributed in a society. And for me, it is not a coincidence that while we are entering this third industrial revolution that Jeremy Rifkin speaks about, that while we are entering this third industrial revolution that will change the way that power is distributed, that we at the same time see that all kinds of secret services around the world are more aggressive than ever in trying to protect the sovereignty they have over information. Because at the end of the day, it is all about control. It is all about, if you want to remain in power, it is all about how you make sure that your information is better than everybody else's so you can take the better decisions. This is what any kind of intelligence, whether in business or whether in the government, is about. It's about having better information than everybody else. So this whole concept is quite in a conflict, I think, with an inclusive type of world. A world which could embrace everybody to take part, as long as they connect to this global network, as long as they start to engage with other people all around the world and start organizing in order to solve the problems that we have. This is in conflict with this idea of nation states, for example, that protect their own interests and that have intelligence agencies in order to make sure that these interests are protected. Yet, for more than 2 years, we are having a debate, or actually we're not having a debate, about all kinds of really bad intrusions into the integrity of the technology we're building and using. From undermining and infiltrating committees that come up with standards that we develop technology on, up to the fact that we're getting the most catastrophic messages about what kinds of technologies have been corrupted, have been infiltrated. Not sure how much you're still following this whole NSA story, but it's getting worse every day. Every single day we have more news about more disruptive invasion of our technologies, about more manipulation, and about, at the end of the day, more destabilization of the world than we could want. And I personally don't really understand why there's not an outcry here at CeBIT. Why is not CeBIT here having a gathering of all the vendors, of all the manufacturers, of all you people in the industry, just to, for once, bring up your voice and say that you're not complying with this, that you're not just going to take it, because there are people investing millions and millions and hundreds of millions every year to undermine the very work that you're all doing, to undermine the quality of the products you're either producing or that you're consuming. The products you use in order to offer services to people that use these services to make something out of it. Not just because it's fancy technology, but because it has a valid application for society, an application for businesses. So I don't really understand this apathy. I don't understand why we're all just looking away and we all still seem to think that it's not something we should be concerned about. I think we urgently need to be concerned about this because it's something that at the end of the day can be very, very bad for the way that society is developing, for the perspective that we get, for the way we can structure society, because it will limit us in the freedoms that we have. It will limit us in the way how freely we can rethink society. And this is something we need to be concerned about. So back in the time when I was still at the WikiLeaks project, we had this very smart credo of why we were doing this project in the first place. And this credo was that history is the only guidebook that civilization has. And I think this is very valid. We can learn a lot from history. We can understand how things came to be today, and we can understand what to look out for in order to maybe not make history repeat itself. Now, for the entire time, I can think, from the time I grew up as a teen or so, that I started to get interested in the world, in politics, in understanding what's happening. From that very time on, I was very interested in history because I thought it might be something, there might be hidden some hints of how things are happening, why things are happening, that can help me as an individual to make better decisions, to make things in a way, or to take decisions that are not harming people so much, that are actually advancing the world into something better. Whether this is as a consumer, how I spend my money, whether this is as just a voter that's going to vote somewhere, as a citizen that needs to find out whom to support and whom not to, or whether this is just as a human being that needs to figure out what to support and what to demonstrate against in the streets if it becomes necessary. So I had a very long phase in my teens that I bugged my grandparents about what happened in German history and why these things had actually happened, because I thought this is such a dramatic example of how a whole society can suddenly run into the wrong direction and things can evolve in a way that suddenly you find yourself in a world that you wouldn't want to have. And I was always wondering of how this could happen. But there's one question I'd never wondered about, and it took me many more years, up to I think 2003 or so, that I asked that question. And that simple question is, how did a regime that decided to exterminate large parts of a population, how did this regime actually end up with lists of people? How did they determine who to exterminate? it's a really simple question, but I can remember in all of my history lessons in school time, in all the discussions I had with people, anybody addressing that kind of very fundamental question. And the answer was provided in 2001 in a really important book that was published by an American investigative journalist from the New York Times called Edwin Black. And it's called IBM and the Holocaust. And it's a history of how the Nazi regime used punch card systems, the first technology, the origin of what we're doing here today, in order to organize and collect information about people and sort and alphabetize and all kinds of other operations worked on that kind of information in order to come up with lists of people to exterminate. Now, I'm saying this because I think there's a few important lessons we can take from that very important point in time. And one is that it's very likely at some stage that you might find a business case that has an application that will turn against the people with technology. Now, what do we do as an industry if we don't have a dialogue about the ethics of big data, about the ethics of the cloud, about the implication that there's very few companies all over the world that hold such a wealth of information about all of us that we could determine interesting people, however you define them, to a much greater detail than any time before? What does it mean if we haven't ever had this kind of a debate about the collection of all of that data? And what is actually preventing this data from being used against the people? The only thing preventing this is that we here in Germany and in other parts of the world are living in democratic states. But what does it tell us that we live in a time in where we have mass surveillance and all kinds of oversteppings of rules and laws and, I don't know, human common sense, that there is no demonstration here. There is no politics present, mainly, at least, or very slightly here at CeBIT. There is no political discussion, actually, really about this whole topic in Germany. So how good is our fundament for the political impact or the political dimension this whole topic has? How much are we aware of how political this whole topic is and how much we need to engage into politics and care for politics in order to make sure that all this technology we're creating and all this data that you're collecting and all these algorithms you're building, that this doesn't get turned against the people again? We haven't learned from that lesson at all. We spent 80 years without having this kind of discussion that is so fundamental, I believe. Now, we also live in a time in which I think we still live in a time of a window of opportunity, so to say. So you can see that all the algorithms working on big data these days are so imprecise, are so bad, that actually lots of people turn up in databases flagged as potential terrorists or whatever that are just harmless citizens. There's countless examples we could hear in the last few months and years about people suddenly turning up into some kind of a raster database of potential terrorists that haven't done anything at all, where just maybe the husband was looking for a backpack to buy online and his wife was looking at the same time for a boiling pot, and the combination of a boiling pot and a backpack turned out to be some algorithm defined as potentially dangerous because of the Boston Marathon bombers. Now, this is the type of quality of algorithms we see today, and these algorithms are completely not working with all this big amounts of data we have amassed. But this is just valid for today. If we look into today or maybe next week, this is going to change because we're developing into a time in which technology in this respect is going to change. So when I arrived here at CeBIT today, the first thing I saw was this big IBM booth. And I'm back with IBM now, not because I think IBM is the most evil company or so, just don't misunderstand me there. IBM is probably, with me, has the biggest fanboy they ever got. I grew up in an IBM-driven world with a personal computer that empowered me to learn, to make use of such machines, to solve problems for me, and do all kinds of other things. I'm a really big fan of the engineering this company is doing. But with all the power and all this innovation that is driving this company, they come up, I think, regularly with technology that is posing big questions. So when I arrived here at CeBIT, I thought, this is my chance to see the most amazing discovery or the most amazing innovation IBM has been doing in the last decades, which is a chip called True North. Not entirely sure if anyone of you has heard about it. Unfortunately, nobody at the IBM booth has heard about it. They introduced it a few weeks ago, and it's part of a program run by DARPA in the US called Synapse, and it's one of the efforts to create the first chips that are neuronal chips that are mapped from our brains and that are created in a drive towards this whole big field of artificial intelligence and of cognitive computing, as IBM calls it. So cognitive machines that will be able to think by themselves, that will learn by themselves just as our brains are doing so. And True North has been introduced into, let's say, the public a few months ago now. And it's a chip with 4,096 cores and 256 million synapses. Now, if you remember biology from biology class in school or from wherever, you should see that this is related to the brain. And this is not a von Neumann architecture type of chip anymore. This is a whole different type of chip. It's a chip that can learn by itself. It's a chip that you can feed with a video feed, and it will understand after some time that this is a car, and this is a bike, and this is a human being. Even if it doesn't know what the concepts of these objects is, but it can learn to differentiate by itself. And this is just the beginning of the next era of computing that we're going to see, the era of machines that will be able to learn and to process all that data in a completely new fashion. It will mean that Siri will not be running in the cloud somewhere, but that the data will be processed on your phone, because this is where the intelligence will be. But on the other hand, it will also mean that all this data that all the surveillance cameras are producing, that all kinds of other surveillance systems all around the world are producing, can be harvested and can be made sense of by these types of intelligent chips that don't really know limits anymore in how they can process data. So I think with this type of technology introduced into the market, this is what will close a window of opportunity, because suddenly it will be feasible for some people to use all of that data to control everybody else, something that is not possible today. So my pledge here, and I'm just running out of time, my pledge here for all of you would be that you need to understand that we have tremendous potential to use all of this technology in order to empower the people on this planet and to solve problems for the people on this planet. But this will not come by itself. It will not come just because you create the technology. This will only come if you are a political and a social lobby for a good and sane use of technology as well. And if we have a debate in this window of opportunity before it closes. So please don't let any more time be wasted. Don't let more time pass while we're not speaking up against all of these topics. But let's make sure that we can make use of all of this for a better future, and not one that we're looking at and think, how could this ever have happened? Thank you very much.
Daniel, we've got time for some questions. Let's see if there's any questions from the audience. Yeah. Anyone got any questions? What about yesterday when we were talking with Glenn? We'll get that one back there in just a second. I was asking about the fact, did he think that there needs to be some sort of revolution right now for people to maybe become aware of what's being done with technology right now? What do you say about that?
Well, you see, we're actually we're driving towards a revolution. This whole process that is happening all around us is kind of a revolution, and the revolution can turn out in different ways. It can turn out into a world that will manifest more and more of these monopolies, with fewer and fewer companies having more and more control and power over everybody else. Or we can understand that this revolution can actually be one that is empowering every individual out there. This is what all these devices here should be about. Every smartphone today has about 100 times the capability, the processing capability of all of the computers involved in sending the first men to the moon.
Right.
So we're carrying so much potential around with us.
That's what
make so
Rifkin
much
said, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is our responsibility to make something out of that. And I think this is what this whole development is all about. We are responsible for making use, and we should stop actually outsourcing that responsibility to governments or companies or whoever else.
That's a good point, outsourcing the revolution. All right, there was the person here with a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Daniel. This is Naveen. One question regarding your point about surveillance. You put a point like uncontrolled surveillance going on right now. Okay, I'm slightly with you on that. But man, being an intelligent animal, needs to be monitored, isn't it? Somebody needs to put a monitor on you because you can't be destructive. Same way, you plan to put a monitor on the machine or chips. They can't be destructive. They can be controlled. So in your point of view, what balance the government and society need to strike here to take society forward in a controlled manner?
Well, I tend to disagree. But I think it's a generic question that you have there, or a generic premise that people are, I don't know, disruptive or are destructive in the nature. I think it's different. I don't need a monitor to be put on me because I'm not going to hurt somebody. I can agree on that rule without police being out there ready to arrest me. Maybe I'm, I don't know, more advanced or more enlightened or whatever than the majority of people that you're speaking about. I don't know. I don't think so. I think people grow up, every single human being grows up with a potential of being the most wonderful person. And the rest is just a question of how the circumstances in life are. And here we are back with all this development because we can create a world in which more people have opportunities, in which more people have the possibilities to develop in circumstances that are actually beneficial for them and that will make them good people and not people defecting in society. But to come back to your point on where the balance is, I think it's a really simple question. You need more monitoring and more surveillance, if you so want, wherever the power is. The more power somebody or some organization or something wields, the more important it is that it's transparent, that there's control, that there's some kind of monitoring going on, so that this organization or this individual cannot abuse the power against everybody else. But my feeling is that the individual, all of you single individuals out here, not in your roles as decision takers or so, that we don't wield so much power. So we are on the other end of that spectrum somehow. So why monitor all of us? Whatever we can do is quite limited when it comes compared to, I don't know, people taking decisions that affect whole societies, people exploiting financial systems that can bankrupt whole nation states, where there's no control, no transparency, and no surveillance whatsoever. So I think we're heading in the wrong direction there. I would be so much in for more transparency and more control, but put that where the power is, and not with all these just individuals that are thriving or trying to make a living out there.
I mean, your point is well taken, but you know, Rifkin was asked about, for example, about extremism and fundamentalism, and how does that fit into the picture that he sees where the world is going? And he had a very positive look at where the world was going. And you say people, you don't have this Hobbesian view of the world, right? You think that people are generally good. And he said that too. But he didn't think that we're going in the wrong direction. You think we are going in the wrong direction.
And I think we're potentially going in the wrong direction if we're not more careful. So if we're not working actively towards going in the right direction,
Right.
then whatever we see today, all these developments will just manifest themselves more. So what Rifkin is speaking about is a very decentralized world. It is a world where we have decentralized production. The 3D printing part is one part of this.
And he also sees us as being able to survey the people who are doing the surveillance.
Yes, well, that's part of
Power.
where transparency is needed as
Right.
well, so that we can make sure that the power of people able to surveil others is not abused.
Right.
So we desperately need more transparency when it comes to that. But I think with this whole development comes the necessity of people to actually grasp the power, to actually demand to be part of this new world. And not to just say, I want somebody else to take care of all of that, because then this will just be very few companies and some not very well-functioning governments that will potentially abuse all of that and not be the most philanthropic kind of approaches out there.
Yeah, interesting. Any other questions for Daniel? Got one right here. Yeah, he's bringing you a mic right here.
Yes, I'm Telle from Be My Eyes, also an open source non-profit project. Anyways, when I hear you talk, I hear a lot of resemblance into Burning Man, like a lot of the same principles. Do you adhere to a lot of them? Like I hear radical self-reliance, at least and radical maybe self-expression, also that you are able to express yourself. It seems like there's at least a lot of similarities in these kind of values. Do you see those in themselves, or have you been and like, are you inspired by that kind of movement? And
Well, I haven't been to Burning Man, so
do you know?
Wouldn't
the
really.
mosque?
Yeah, I know what it's about. I wouldn't really go to the United States either. But
Why not?
there's similar things. I'm, let's say, kind of closely related to the Chaos Computer Club. So I've spent a lot of time there, and every 4 years we're setting up a camp where we're kind of erupting a whole world of technology somewhere in the fields in nowhere, where fiber is put into the ground, where networks are being created, where people come up building tents and putting up all this technology. It's the same kind of idea.
Yeah.
Now, I think generally this approach is more valid than any time before, just because, I don't know, look at the energy revolution. It's not going to happen if we transport all the energy from the north into the south, but it's going to happen if smaller units become more resilient. The same thing goes for the internet. The internet is most healthy. Any network is most healthy if it's made up out of smaller units.
Right.
Now, we did a survey a few weeks ago, and we just pulled the whole BGP routing table, and we created some statistics out of that. If you look at how IP space is distributed today per autonomous systems, you can just get a real serious depression. It's the same thing that is happening with all the money. It's clustering somewhere, and we're not living in a world anymore in which we have lots of small networks and where we can flexibly route around problems in the network. But we have created a world in which very, very few companies are actually holding the majority of the access to the internet. And this is really troublesome. And this, I think, is where we desperately need a movement towards a different direction, because it's healthier, it's better for everybody out there, and not just for few people that are granted access by the companies.
All right. We're out of time. We could talk a lot longer than this, but we have to move on, Daniel. Thank you very much. Let's give Daniel a round of applause.
Thanks.
Daniel, thank you very much.